The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council chamber stretched high above the gathered delegates like a frozen wave. 47 different species sat in their assigned sections, each group representing worlds and civilizations that spanned thousands of light years. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime as beings who had evolved under different suns tried to communicate about the future of the galaxy. Admiral Jack Carter sat straight in his chair, his weathered hands folded on the polished table before him. The human delegation occupied a small section near the back of the chamber, a reminder of how new they were to galactic politics. To his left sat Lisa Morgan, Earth's top diplomatic advisor, her sharp eyes constantly scanning the room for signs of trouble. On his right, Commander Ryan Brooks studied his tablet, reviewing military reports that painted an increasingly grim picture of the war with the Zephyrian Empire. The war had been raging for 3 years now, starting as a simple border dispute over mining rights in the Kepler sector. What began with angry words and trade sanctions had escalated into full military conflict when Zephyrian warships destroyed a human colony transport. 200 civilian families had died in that attack, and Earth had responded with the full fury of its young but determined military. Chancellor Vexthul of the Etherian Collective raised one of his 4 arms, and the chamber fell silent. The ancient being's crystalline features caught the light as he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of 10,000 years of galactic diplomacy. "We gather today to end this senseless conflict between the human newcomers and our esteemed Zephyrian allies," he announced. Each word translated instantly into dozens of languages. Carter felt his jaw tighten at the word newcomers. Humanity had been part of the galactic community for 50 years, had contributed to trade, science, and even peacekeeping missions. Yet they were still treated like children who had wandered into an adult conversation. "The Galactic Council has prepared terms that will bring lasting peace to this sector," Vexthul continued. A holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing a detailed map of human space. Red lines began appearing across it, sectioning off systems and trade routes. These boundaries will ensure that both species can coexist without further conflict. Lisa leaned forward, her diplomatic training keeping her expression neutral, even as her mind raced through the implications of what she was seeing. The proposed boundaries would cut off 3 of humanity's most productive colonies and lock them out of the major trade lanes that connected the outer rim to the galactic. Counselor Thargon of the Hegemony rose from his section, his massive bulk casting a shadow across the floor. "The humans have proven themselves to be unnecessarily aggressive in their response to this conflict," he rumbled, his translated voice carrying a tone of disdain. "Perhaps it would be wise to implement certain restrictions to prevent future incidents." "What kind of restrictions?" Carter asked, rising to his feet. Protocol demanded that he wait to be recognized before speaking, but something in Thargon's tone had set off every alarm bell in his military mind. The Hegemony Counselor's 6 eyes fixed on Carter with unconcealed contempt. "Restrictions on military vessel construction, limitations on territorial expansion, mandatory oversight of human colonies by Council peacekeepers," he said, each word hitting like a physical blow. "The galaxy has enjoyed 10 millennia of peace under Council guidance. We cannot allow one species' violent tendencies to disrupt that harmony." Commander Brooks looked up from his tablet, his young face pale with anger. The reports he had been reading detailed Zephyrian attacks on civilian targets, the use of banned weapons against human settlements, and evidence of Council member species providing military support to the Zephyrian war effort. Yet here they sat, being lectured about violent tendencies. "The Zephyrians started this war," Lisa said, her diplomatic training keeping her voice level. "They destroyed a civilian transport without warning, without provocation. Humanity has only defended itself and its citizens." A ripple of what sounded like laughter passed through the Zephyrian delegation. Ambassador Keithatar rose gracefully, his serpentine form swaying as he addressed the chamber. "The humans speak of defense, yet their military response has been far out of proportion to the incident in question," he hissed. 200 regrettable casualties do not justify the destruction of 17 Zephyrian naval vessels and the occupation of 2 of our mining stations." Carter felt something cold settle in his stomach. Regrettable casualties. That was how they saw the deaths of 200 human men, women, and children, numbers on a report rather than lives cut short. Those mining stations were built on asteroids that belonged to human corporations, Brooks said, his military bearing evident as he stood. And those 17 ships were destroyed while attacking human colonies. The humans fail to understand the delicate balance that maintains galactic peace, Vexthul interjected, his crystalline features shifting to display what passed for disapproval among his species. For 10,000 years, the Council has prevented major conflicts through careful mediation and appropriate responses to aggression. Appropriate responses, Carter repeated, the words bitter in his mouth. Tell me, Chancellor, what would be an appropriate response if someone killed 200 Etherian civilians? The chamber fell silent. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others exchanged glances that spoke of conversations held in private chambers before this meeting. The Etherian collective has not faced such a situation in over 3 millennia, Vexthul replied carefully. We have evolved beyond such primitive conflicts. Lucky you, Carter said, his voice carrying an edge that made even the translator devices pause. Humanity hasn't had that luxury. We've spent our entire history learning that sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to hit back harder than they hit you. Thargon's massive form shifted, and his voice carried a note of finality when he spoke. This proves our point exactly. The humans are too aggressive, too quick to resort to violence. Perhaps it would be best for all concerned if they were contained to their home system until they can learn to conduct themselves in a more civilized manner. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, contained, as if humanity were a disease to be quarantined rather than a species. With rights and dignity, Carter looked around the chamber, seeing the faces of beings who had already made up their minds. The Etherians nodded in agreement with Thargon's suggestion. The hegemony delegation looked satisfied. Even some of the smaller species that had once seemed friendly to humanity were avoiding eye contact. He thought of the families on the colony ships, the miners working the asteroid belts, the explorers pushing into unknown space. All of it would be lost if they accepted these terms. Humanity would become a pet species, kept in a cage and fed scraps from the galactic table. Lisa caught his eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. She had reached the same conclusion he had. This wasn't a peace negotiation. It was a surrender demand dressed up in diplomatic language. Carter stood slowly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence that had fallen over the chamber. Earth's delegation withdraws from these talks, he announced, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the massive room. We will not negotiate our extinction. Lisa rose beside him, her diplomatic mask finally slipping to reveal the steel underneath. When you're ready to treat us as equals rather than problems to be solved, you know where to find us. The 3 humans walked toward the exit, their footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. As they reached the doors, Carter turned back to face the chamber one last time. You've made a mistake today, he said quietly, but his words carried in the perfect acoustics of the crystal dome. You've forgotten something important about humanity. We're not just another species looking for a place at your table. We're survivors, and when you corner a survivor, they don't surrender. They fight. The doors closed behind them with a soft chime, leaving the Galactic Council to contemplate what they had just unleashed. 3 months had passed since the humans walked out of the peace talks, and the Galactic Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy. Chancellor Vexthul stood at the center of the crystal dome, his forearms gesturing as he addressed the gathered delegates. The emergency session had been called because the situation with humanity had spiraled far beyond what anyone had expected. The human response to our reasonable terms has been predictably primitive, Vexthul announced, his crystalline features reflecting the soft light of the chamber. Rather than accept the wisdom of the Council, they have chosen to escalate their conflict with the Zephyrian Empire. Councillor Thargon shifted his massive bulk in his specially reinforced chair. The reports from the front lines are clearly exaggerated propaganda, he rumbled. Humans lack the technological sophistication to achieve the victories their media claims. Ambassador Kethtar of the Zephyrian Empire rose gracefully, but there was something different about his usual confident demeanor. His serpentine form seemed more tense, and his scaled skin had lost some of its usual luster. The situation is more complex than we initially assessed, he admitted reluctantly. Explain, Vexthul commanded, his ancient voice carrying the weight of 10 millennia of authority. Kethtar activated a holographic display that showed the Kepler sector where the war had been raging. Red markers indicated Zephyrian positions while blue markers showed human forces. What caught everyone's attention was how many red markers had disappeared over the past 3 months. Captain Danny Rodriguez of the human vessel UES Defiance somehow destroyed an entire battle fleet, Kethtar said, his voice barely concealing his disbelief. 17 ships, including our flagship Sovereign Thunder, were eliminated in less than 4 hours. A murmur of skepticism rippled through the chamber. The Sovereign Thunder was a dreadnought, class vessel with shields that could withstand planetary bombardment and weapons capable of cracking moons. Impossible, declared Counselor HFY of the Technical Union. Human vessels are primitive, constructs barely capable of faster-than-light travel. Their weapons technology is centuries behind galactic standards. Kethtar's eyes flashed with anger. That is what we believed as well. Yet the evidence is undeniable. The wreckage of our ships drifts in space, and human forces now control 3 systems that were considered impregnable. Dr. Helen Clark had been working around the clock in her laboratory aboard the human research station Galileo. The elderly scientist had gray hair that refused to stay in place, and eyes that burned with the intensity of someone who had found a solution to an impossible problem. Her team had been given unlimited resources and a simple directive from Earth Command: develop weapons that could level the playing field against superior alien technology. The problem isn't that their ships are better, she explained to her assistant, Tony Walsh, as they stood before a massive holographic display showing alien vessel schematics. The problem is that they've been building the same ships for thousands of years. They've forgotten how to innovate. Tony nodded as he studied the data streams flowing across his workstation. The young engineer had been recruited from Earth's most advanced shipyards, and his expertise in retrofitting vessels had become crucial to the war effort. Their plasma cannons are powerful, but they follow predictable firing patterns, he said. If we can develop shielding that adapts to those patterns— Exactly, Helen said, her weathered face breaking into a grin. They think in terms of overwhelming force. We think in terms of outsmarting the force. Back in the council chamber, more disturbing reports were flowing in from across the galaxy. Captain Linda Stevens had somehow managed to capture a Zephyrian supply depot without firing a single shot. Her small squadron had simply appeared in the system, broadcast a message offering the garrison safe passage home, and waited. Within 6 hours, the entire facility had surrendered. How does one capture a military installation through negotiation? Asked Councillor Murdoch of the Pacifist Coalition, his tentacles writhing with confusion. The humans offered them something we never considered, Kethtar admitted. They offered the garrison freedom to leave with their personal belongings and safe passage to any neutral system. No punishment, no retribution, no shame. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Zephyrian military operated on strict hierarchies where failure meant disgrace or death. The concept of offering defeated enemies, dignity and freedom was so alien to their thinking that many soldiers chose surrender over certain doom. Vexthol's crystalline features shifted to display deep concern. The humans are using psychological warfare, he observed. They understand that fear of punishment keeps soldiers fighting even hopeless battles. It gets worse, Kethtar continued reluctantly. Dr. Peter Morgan has developed weapons specifically designed to target our physiology. Sonic frequencies that disrupt our nervous systems, gases that are harmless to other species but lethal to us, even modified bacteria that affect only Zephyrian biology. Councillor Thargon slammed one of his massive fists on his desk. Biological warfare is banned under galactic law, he roared. This proves that humans are too savage for civilized society. The weapons are non-lethal, Kethtar said quietly. They incapacitate our forces without permanent harm, but the psychological effect is devastating. Our soldiers know that humans can kill them at any time but choose not to. It makes them question why they are fighting. The reports kept coming, each one more impossible than the last. Colonel Sam Parker had led a ground assault that captured a Zephyrian military academy, using tactics that defied conventional wisdom. Instead of attacking the strongest points, his forces had targeted the weakest, moving through areas that were considered impassable. When the defenders rushed to reinforce their broken lines, they found that human soldiers had already secured the central command structure. They fight like they're hunting prey, reported General Vexmore, the Zephyrian military commander who had barely escaped the Academy assault. They don't seek honorable combat or strategic advantage. They fight to win completely. The most disturbing report came from the Outer Rim territories. A human fleet under the command of Major Alice Turner had appeared in the hegemony system of Koldar, but instead of attacking military targets, they had broadcast a message to the enslaved populations. People of Koldar, Turner's message had said, humanity offers you a choice. Continue to serve masters who see you as property, or join us in building something better. We ask nothing in return except that you extend the same freedom to others. Within days, 3 hegemony worlds had erupted in revolution. Slave populations that had been suppressed for generations suddenly had weapons, tactics, and most importantly, hope. The carefully maintained balance of power that kept the hegemony's empire stable was crumbling. The humans are sharing their technology, reported Counselor Yevhai, his mechanical voice carrying a note of panic. Not selling, not trading, sharing. They're giving advanced weapons and defensive systems to any species that asks. Vexthul felt something he had not experienced in millennia. Genuine fear. The Galactic Order had been maintained for 10,000 years through careful control of technology and resources. Species were kept dependent on the Council for advanced systems, ensuring their loyalty and compliance. This cannot continue, he declared, his voice echoing through the crystal dome. The humans must be brought to heel before they destroy everything we have built. Perhaps we should reconsider our approach, suggested Counselor Murdak hesitantly. If we offered them a better deal. No, Thargon interrupted. Showing weakness now would only encourage other species to challenge our authority. We must demonstrate that defying the Council has consequences. Bexthol nodded slowly. The Council votes to impose complete economic sanctions on human space. All trade routes through Council territory are closed to human vessels. All diplomatic relations are severed. Any species that aids humanity will face similar sanctions. The vote was unanimous, as Council votes always were. But as the delegates filed out of the chamber, many carried expressions of doubt. They had expected the humans to come crawling back within weeks, begging for mercy and accepting any terms offered. Instead, humanity was winning. Not just winning battles, but winning hearts and minds across the galaxy. For the first time in 10 millennia, the Galactic Council faced a threat they didn't understand and couldn't control. In her laboratory aboard the Galileo, Dr. Helen Clark received a priority message from Earth Command. The text was brief but carried enormous implications. Gloves off, authorization granted. Show them what happens when you corner a predator. Helen smiled as she began typing new orders for her research teams. The galaxy was about to learn why humanity had never lost a war on its home planet. 6 months after the economic sanctions began, the Galactic Council chamber no longer echoed with confident speeches and arrogant proclamations. Instead, nervous whispers filled the crystal dome as delegates huddled in small groups, sharing reports that grew more impossible with each passing day. The humans had not collapsed under the weight of galactic isolation as everyone had predicted. Instead, they had done something far worse. They had thrived. Commander Kate Johnson stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UES Ghostwalker, watching as another Zephyrian supply convoy disappeared from their sensors. Her ship's new stealth technology, developed by Dr. Helen Clark's team, made them completely invisible to standard detection methods. The convoy commander was probably staring at his instruments right now, wondering where an entire fleet of human vessels had gone. Target their engines only, Kate ordered her weapons officer, Lieutenant Bill Harris. We want them disabled, not destroyed. The Ghostwalker materialized behind the largest transport vessel like a nightmare stepping out of empty space. Within minutes, the entire convoy was dead in space, their crews unharmed but their cargo holds open to human boarding parties. Kate studied the manifest on her personal tablet as her Marines secured the ships. Food supplies meant for Zephyrian forward bases, medical equipment for their wounded, spare parts for their weapons systems. All of it would now find its way to human colonies or to the growing number of species that had joined humanity's cause. Another Ghost Protocol success, she reported to her communications officer. Log it and send the data to Fleet Command. They'll want to know that the Zephyrians still can't track us. The Ghost Protocols had been Kate's idea, developed from her study of Earth's military history. Ancient human warriors had used terrain and misdirection to defeat larger armies. In space there was no terrain, but there were sensor shadows, electromagnetic fields, and the vast emptiness between stars. Human ships had learned to use space itself as camouflage. In the council chamber, Chancellor Vexthul reviewed reports that made his crystalline features dim with concern. The human tactics defied everything the galaxy understood about warfare. They didn't fight for territory or resources in the traditional sense. Instead, they fought to break their enemy's ability and will to continue fighting. The humans have captured 17 more supply convoys this month, reported Admiral Kethvar, who had replaced his disgraced predecessor. They take the supplies but release the crews unharmed. Many of our transport captains are now requesting transfers to non-combat duties. Counselor Thargon's massive form shifted uneasily in his reinforced chair. How can they appear and disappear at will? Our sensors are the most advanced in the galaxy. Dr. Peter Morgan has weaponized human creativity, Kethvar explained, his serpentine form coiled with tension. They don't improve existing technology. They reinvent it completely. Their scientists work like artists, creating solutions that we would never consider. The reports from Dr. Peter Morgan's research division painted a picture of warfare that terrified the established powers. Asteroid mining equipment had been converted into weapons capable of cracking battlecruisers. Civilian cargo haulers now carried stealth generators and missile systems hidden in fake shipping containers. Even human agricultural ships had been transformed into biological warfare platforms, though they used non-lethal agents that incapacitated rather than killed. They've turned their entire economy into a war machine, observed Counselor Yevhai, his mechanical voice carrying notes of grudging respect. But it's not like our war machines. Every human vessel, from the smallest courier to the largest transport, can become a weapon when needed. The most disturbing reports came from the ground campaigns. Colonel Sam Parker had become a legend among both human and alien forces for his ability to achieve impossible victories with minimal casualties. His latest campaign on the contested world of Kepler-7 had ended with the surrender of an entire Zephyrian garrison, without a single shot being fired. He used their own supply lines against them, General Vexmore reported to the emergency council session. His forces cut off food and water to the garrison, then dropped care packages containing human rations and medical supplies. The packages included messages explaining that humans fed their enemies because they believed in treating prisoners with dignity. Psychological warfare, Vexthul observed. More than that, Vexmore continued. The packages also contained data files showing how human prisoners were treated in Zephyrian facilities compared to how Zephyrian prisoners were treated in human facilities. Within days, half the garrison had defected. The truth was spreading across the galaxy like wildfire. Humans didn't just fight differently. They thought differently about war itself. Where other species saw conflict as a struggle for dominance, humans saw it as a problem to be solved. They studied their enemies not just to defeat them, but to understand why they were fighting in the first place. Major Alice Turner's liberation campaigns had sparked revolutions on 12 worlds in the past month alone. Her fleet didn't conquer planets. It arrived with food, medical supplies, and weapons for anyone willing to fight for their own freedom. More importantly, her forces brought human, military advisors who taught effective resistance tactics to species that had been enslaved for generations. The humans are creating an army of former slaves, reported Counselor Merdak, his tentacles writhing with distress. Every world they liberate becomes a recruitment center for their cause. The hegemony delegation looked particularly uncomfortable. Their empire had been built on the systematic oppression of dozens of species, and human interference was causing their carefully maintained control structure to collapse. Slave revolts were spreading faster than they could be suppressed, and each rebellion was better organized and more effective than the last. Dr. Amy Watson's Innovation Center had become the galaxy's most dangerous research facility, not because of the weapons it produced, but because of the ideas it spread. Her teams had developed a universal translation protocol that allowed any species to communicate with any other species instantly. More importantly, they had created an information network that allowed oppressed populations to coordinate their resistance efforts across vast distances. They're not just sharing technology, Yevhai reported grimly. They're sharing knowledge, tactics, and philosophy. Every species that fights alongside humans becomes more effective at fighting for themselves. Captain Rick Murphy's deep space reconnaissance missions had uncovered the truth that the Council had spent millennia hiding. The galactic government wasn't a peaceful alliance of equals working together for mutual benefit. It was a carefully constructed system designed to keep emerging species weak and dependent, while a few powerful races maintained control of resources and technology. The humans have proof, Murphy had transmitted in his latest report. They've documented the systematic suppression of technological development, the artificial scarcity of resources, and the manipulation of conflicts to prevent any species from becoming strong enough to challenge the established order. The evidence was spreading through human information networks to every corner of the galaxy. Species that had accepted their inferior status for thousands of years were beginning to question why they remained inferior when humans could advance from primitive spaceflight to galactic power in just 50 years. Chancellor Vexthul felt the weight of 10 millennia of civilization pressing down on his crystalline shoulders. The Etherian Collective had helped build the current galactic order because it provided stability and peace. But that peace had been maintained through the systematic oppression of countless billions of sentient beings. The humans haven't just defeated our military forces, he admitted to the assembled council. They've defeated our entire philosophy of governance. Councillor Thargon's 6 eyes blazed with fury. Then we must destroy them completely before they destroy everything we've built. With what forces? Kethavar asked bitterly. Half our fleets have been captured or destroyed. The other half are defecting to the human cause. Even our own crews are beginning to question why they're fighting. The reports kept coming throughout the emergency session. Human forces had not just survived the galactic sanctions. They had turned isolation into an advantage. Cut off from galactic trade, they had developed new technologies and formed alliances with species that the Council had ignored or oppressed. Every attempt to contain humanity had only made them stronger and more determined. As the session ended, Chancellor Vexthul made a decision that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. The Etherian Collective would begin secret negotiations with human representatives, not to demand surrender, but to explore the possibility of joining the growing alliance of free species that humanity was creating. The galaxy's oldest civilization had finally recognized what the humans had been trying to tell them from the beginning. Real peace could never be built on oppression, and real strength came not from controlling others, but from helping them become strong enough to control themselves. 1 year after the failed peace talks, the galaxy was burning with the fires of revolution. What had started as a simple border dispute between humans and Zephyrians had grown into something that shook the foundations of galactic civilization. In the council chamber on Nexus Prime, emergency sessions were now held daily as reports flooded in from across known space. Major Alice Turner stood on the command deck of her flagship, the UES Liberation, watching as 3 more hegemony worlds declared their independence. Her fleet had not fired a single shot at these planets. Instead, they had simply arrived in orbit and broadcast a message that changed everything. People of these worlds, her transmission had said, we bring you weapons, supplies, and knowledge, not to conquer you, but to help you conquer yourselves. Freedom is not something that can be given, it must be taken. The response had been immediate and overwhelming. On the industrial world of Vector, factory workers had seized control of their manufacturing plants and begun producing weapons for the rebellion. On the agricultural planet of Zoldan, farmers had used their knowledge of local terrain to trap and defeat hegemony security forces. On the mining moon of Kethmore, workers had turned their excavation equipment into tools of war. Alice watched the holographic displays showing liberation movements spreading across the galaxy like wildfire. Each successful rebellion inspired others, and the human strategy of sharing technology and tactics meant that every new revolution was more effective than the last. Ma'am, reported her communications officer, Lieutenant Jenny Walsh, we're receiving surrender requests from 6 more hegemony garrison commanders. They're asking for the same terms we offered on Proxima Station. Alice nodded grimly. The surrender terms were simple. Lay down your weapons, harm no civilians during your withdrawal, and you will be given safe passage to any neutral system with full honors. It was a deal that most military commanders found impossible to refuse, especially when the alternative was fighting an increasingly hopeless war. In the council chamber, Councillor Thargon received reports that made his massive frame shake with rage. The hegemony had lost control of 47 worlds in the past month alone. Worse, Many of their own military units were defecting to join the human cause. The humans have corrupted our soldiers with their twisted philosophy, he roared at the assembled delegates. They preach equality and freedom as if these concepts have any meaning in an ordered universe. Chancellor Vexathul's crystalline features had grown dim with exhaustion. The ancient Etherian had lived through the rise and fall of civilizations, but he had never seen anything like what humanity was doing to the established order. Perhaps, he said carefully, we should consider what the humans are actually offering these rebellious populations. The answer came in detailed reports from intelligence services across the galaxy. Humans didn't just liberate worlds and leave. They stayed to help build new governments, sharing their knowledge of democracy, individual rights, and economic systems that empowered citizens rather than enslaving them. Dr. Amy Watson's technological gifts had transformed warfare across the galaxy. The universal communication network she had created allowed oppressed populations to coordinate resistance efforts across vast distances. Her teams had also developed manufacturing systems that could be operated by anyone, regardless of their species or technological background. They're making everyone equal, reported Counselor Yevhai with something approaching awe. A primitive species with medieval technology can now produce advanced weapons and defensive systems using human manufacturing templates. The most shocking development came from the Outer Rim, territories where the Etherians had made their fatal mistake. Desperate to regain control of the situation, they had attempted to attack Earth directly, believing that cutting off humanity's head would end the rebellion. Colonel Ben Hayes commanded the Soul Defense Network from his position on Luna Base. The grizzled veteran had spent 30 years preparing Earth's defenses against alien invasion, but even he was surprised by the scope of the Etherian attack. 200 warships, the largest fleet ever assembled by a single species, had entered the solar system with the intention of bombarding Earth into submission. They picked the wrong solar system to invade, Ben muttered to his tactical officer, Captain Steve Moore, as they watched the enemy fleet approach. The Etherians had made their plans based on outdated intelligence about human defensive capabilities. They expected to face a few dozen patrol ships and some orbital weapons platforms. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a killing field that had been carefully prepared over decades of military planning. The asteroid belt had been transformed into a massive weapons platform. Thousands of mining stations had been converted into missile launchers, railgun emplacements, and energy weapons that could crack capital ships. The moon itself housed defensive systems powerful enough to destroy planets. Activate the Prometheus Protocol, Ben ordered, using the code name for Earth's ultimate defensive strategy. What followed was not a battle but a massacre. The Etherian fleet found itself under attack from every direction as the humans used their own solar system as a weapon. Asteroids were accelerated to relativistic speeds and hurled at enemy ships. Solar energy was focused through massive lenses to create beams that could melt battleship armor. Even the ice comets from the outer system were turned into kinetic weapons. Within 6 hours, the most powerful fleet in galactic history had been reduced to scrap metal drifting through space. Worse for the Etherians, the entire battle had been broadcast across the galaxy through Dr. Watson's communication network. Let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks they can threaten our home. Ben's message had concluded. Earth is not just defended by ships and weapons. It's defended by the determination of 8 billion humans who will never surrender. The psychological impact of the Sol system battle was devastating. The Etherians had been considered the most advanced military force in the galaxy, and they had been utterly destroyed by what other species still considered a primitive civilization. Captain Rick Murphy's reconnaissance missions revealed the true scope of what humanity had accomplished. The careful balance of power that had maintained galactic stability for millennia was completely shattered. Former slave species were not just winning their independence. They were becoming powerful enough to threaten their former masters. The humans didn't just start a revolution, Rick reported to Admiral Carter. They started an evolution. Every species they've helped is now helping others. The liberation movement is spreading exponentially. The reports kept flowing into the council chamber, each one more dire than the last. On the industrial world of Gamma Centauri, human advisors had helped local engineers develop manufacturing systems that could produce starships in weeks rather than years. On the research station of Alpha Proxima, human scientists had shared advanced physics, theories that allowed other species to develop their own breakthrough technologies Dr. Helen Clark's research had revealed, something that terrified the established powers. There was nothing special about human technology except the philosophy behind it. Other species were just as capable of innovation and advancement. They had simply been prevented from reaching their potential by the existing power structure. We've been keeping them weak deliberately, Councillor Murdoch admitted during a closed session of the council leadership. Our entire civilization is built on the assumption that only a few species are capable of true advancement. And now the humans have proven that assumption wrong. Vexthul replied wearily. The final blow came when the Human Information Network released documented evidence of the Council's systematic oppression of emerging species. Dr. Peter Morgan's intelligence teams had uncovered thousands of years of records showing how technological development had been artificially limited, how resources had been hoarded by the powerful, and how conflicts had been deliberately created to prevent unity among the oppressed. The evidence sparked revolutions on every world where it was received. Even species that had been loyal to the Council for millennia began to question their place in the galactic order. The human philosophy of individual freedom and technological advancement was spreading like a virus through civilizations that had accepted stagnation as natural law. As the year anniversary of the failed peace talks approached, Chancellor Vexthul faced a reality that no galactic leader had confronted in 10,000 years. The established order was not just challenged, it was dying. In its place, something new was being born, something that promised equality and advancement for all species rather than just the chosen few. The humans had not simply won a war, they had won the future itself. 2 years after walking out of the peace talks, Admiral Jack Carter returned to Nexus Prime. The crystal dome of the Galactic Council chamber looked the same as it had during that fateful meeting, but everything else had changed. The seats that had once held representatives of 47 species now contained fewer than a dozen delegates, and most of those were there to formally surrender rather than negotiate. Carter walked through the same doors he had stormed out of 24 months earlier, but this time he was not coming to beg for reasonable terms. He was coming to accept the unconditional surrender of the galactic government that had tried to cage humanity. Chancellor Vexthul stood alone at the center of the chamber, his crystalline features dim with defeat. The ancient Etherian who had once commanded the respect of thousands of worlds now faced the collapse of everything his civilization had built over 10 millennia. Admiral Carter, Vexthul said, his voice carrying none of its former authority, we surrender unconditionally to the human alliance and request mercy for our civilians. Carter studied the broken figure before him. 2 years of war had aged the Chancellor beyond his already ancient years. The confident being who had dismissed humanity as primitive newcomers was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. Tell me, Chancellor, Carter said quietly, do you understand what went wrong? Vexthul's forearms hung limp at his sides. We thought you were just another species to be managed, he admitted. We forgot that humans are predators who learn to cooperate. When we threatened your pack, we activated something our peaceful galaxy was never prepared to handle. The truth was written in the empty seats around them. The hegemony had collapsed completely when their slave populations rose in coordinated rebellion. The Zephyrian Empire had fragmented into dozens of independent systems, each choosing freedom over the certainty of continued oppression. Even species that had been loyal to the Council for thousands of years had abandoned the old order in favor of the new alliance that humanity was building. Lisa Morgan entered the chamber wearing the simple blue uniform of the newly formed Galactic Alliance. Her role as Secretary General made her the highest-ranking civilian official in the new government, but she carried herself with the same quiet dignity she had shown as a diplomatic advisor. The Alliance Council has reviewed your surrender terms, she announced, her voice echoing in the nearly empty chamber. We accept your unconditional surrender and guarantee the safety of all civilian populations under former Council control. The terms were surprisingly generous for a complete military victory. Etherian worlds would be allowed to govern themselves as long as they respected the rights of other species. Former Council officials would face trial only if they had committed war crimes. Most importantly, Etherian technology and knowledge would be shared freely with all species, rather than hoarded by an elite few. Dr. Helen Clark had spent the past year working with scientists from dozens of species to establish the new technological sharing protocols. The elderly researcher had discovered something remarkable during her interactions with alien colleagues. Every species had unique insights and capabilities that had been suppressed under the old system. Innovation happens when different minds work together, she explained to the gathered delegates. The council kept species isolated to maintain control, but isolation kills creativity. When we started sharing our research freely, everyone became smarter. The results spoke for themselves. Medical advances that had taken the council centuries to develop were now being created in months through collaborative research. Starship designs that combined human adaptability with alien precision were revolutionizing space travel. Even art and culture were flourishing as species that had been forbidden to interact freely began sharing their unique perspectives. Tony Walsh had become the lead engineer for the Alliance's infrastructure projects. His teams were working to establish trade routes, communication networks, and defensive systems that served all member species equally. The young man who had started the war, retrofitting human ships, was now helping to build a galactic civilization based on cooperation rather than domination. Every species brings something valuable to the table. Tony reported to the Alliance Council. The Zephyrians are masters of energy manipulation. The hegemony client races understand large-scale engineering, and the Etherians have knowledge of physics that we're still learning to understand. When we combine our strengths instead of competing with them, everyone benefits. The most dramatic changes had occurred on the worlds that had been liberated during the war. Major Alice Turner, now promoted to general, oversaw the transition from military liberation to civilian governance. Her experience helping former slave populations establish democratic governments had become the model for political transformation across the galaxy. Freedom isn't something you can give to people, Alice explained to a gathering of new planetary leaders. It's something they have to take for themselves. Our job is just to make sure they have the tools and knowledge they need to succeed. The liberated worlds were thriving in ways that surprised even human observers. Species that had been considered primitive under the old system were developing advanced technologies and sophisticated governments. The artificial limitations that had kept them dependent on council oversight were gone, replaced by an environment that encouraged growth and innovation. Captain Danny Rodriguez, now Admiral Rodriguez, commanded the Alliance Defense Force that protected the new civilization from threats both internal and external. His fleet included ships from dozens of species, all working together under a unified command structure that emphasized cooperation over hierarchy. We don't fight to conquer, Danny explained to his multinational officer corps. We fight to protect the right of every species to determine its own destiny. That's a cause worth dying for, and more importantly, it's a cause worth living for. The new galactic government bore little resemblance to the old council system. Instead of a few powerful species making decisions for everyone else, the Alliance operated on principles of representation and equality. Every member world had a voice in the decision-making process, and no single species could dominate the others. Dr. Amy Watson's communication networks had evolved into something far more sophisticated than simple translation systems. They now carried educational content, cultural exchanges, and collaborative research projects that connected billions of beings across thousands of light years. The isolation that had kept species weak and dependent was being replaced by connections that made everyone stronger. As the formal surrender ceremony concluded, Carter found himself standing where Chancellor Vexthul had once lectured humanity about the need for civilized behavior. The irony was not lost on him that the species dismissed as too violent for galactic society had created a more peaceful and prosperous civilization than the one that had existed for 10 millennia. The council thought peace meant control, Carter said to the assembled delegates, many of whom were former enemies who had chosen to join the Alliance rather than fight to the bitter end. We taught them that real peace comes from respect, and respect, as it turns out, is something you have to earn. The crystal dome above them caught the light of Nexus Prime's sun, sending rainbow patterns across the chamber floor. It was the same light that had shone on 47 species bowing to the authority of their supposed betters. But now it illuminated representatives of free peoples working together as equals. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. Humanity had not sought to replace the old galactic order with a new form of domination. Instead, they had created something unprecedented in galactic history, A civilization where strength came from cooperation, where innovation was shared freely, and where every species had the chance to reach its full potential. The galaxy would never be the same, and for the first time in 10,000 years, that was cause for hope rather than fear.